Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar. This is the expert Q&A on growing your online business internationally. I'm Andy Geldman and I'm the founder of Web Retailer, an educational and community site for businesses selling online. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us today and for registering and submitting all your questions. We've had hundreds of questions, so a great selection, and we'll be getting through as many as we can today with the panel. If there are any problems that people are having, technical problems such as they can't hear, there is a chat box within the GoToWebinar control panel, so you can put your questions in there if you've got a problem. We will be recording the webinar and sending the recording to everyone who's registered, including people who couldn't make the webinar today. So here's what we'll be covering today. So first, our panel of experts are going to introduce themselves. Then we'll have a presentation from our sponsor, WorldFirst, about their services. And then we'll get straight into the Q&A, putting your questions to the panel. So first up from the panel is Luke from WorldFirst. Luke, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Andy. Thanks very much for being here, and thanks to everyone who's listening in. Yeah, I head up the strategic partnerships desk for e-commerce at WorldFirst, specifically working with service providers in the e-commerce sector as well as marketplaces specifically. So really looking forward to the questions, and hopefully we'll be able to help you guide a bit of a strategy and help you grow your business online internationally.
Thank you, Luke. And Scott, can you tell us about yourself?
Thanks so much, Andy. Hi, my name is Scott Galvao, and I'm one of the co-founders of InterCultural Elements. InterCultural Elements is a company based in Leipzig in Germany, and in short, what we focus on is trying to help e-commerce sellers like yourselves expand their e-commerce businesses all over the world, and that ranges from everything from translation, localization, straight through, putting all those listings out on as many marketplaces as you like, directly through your listing tool, and we even like to follow up after that with things like customer service and even global return solutions. So yeah, very happy to take questions later on in the presentation.
Thank you, Scott. And Chris from Meridian.
Hello. Yes, I am working with a company called Meridian Global Services, which is a company that is really very much focused on helping online sellers, retailers with their VAT and sales tax issues, particularly when it comes to compliance. So what we would do is we would help people to understand where they need to register for VAT, and we would help them to obtain the relevant VAT numbers and file the returns and all kind of the red tape that nobody really wants to look after. That's what we do.
Thank you, Chris. And finally, Neel from Neteven.
Hello everyone, my name is Neel Bhatt. I look after the business development unit of Neteven in the UK. Without going into too much detail, Neteven are essentially a technological platform that allow brands and retailers to integrate into marketplaces kind of around the world. So your eBays and Amazons and as niche as local vertical marketplaces. And hopefully through the Q&A we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you guys have about these interesting markets.
Thank you, Neel. And yeah, we have a big range of questions. So just before we get into the WorldFirst presentation, just to give you a flavour of the things we'll be talking about, we have questions about just the overall potential of selling internationally. Why do people buy internationally, and which countries are the ones that are the biggest drivers of cross-border e-commerce? We'll be talking about some questions that are around getting started. What are the easiest ways to get started? What are some of the common problems? We'll be talking about shipping and how to save money on shipping. We'll be talking about pricing and the impact on currency on your prices and how you account for that. Global customer support, alternative marketplaces, so marketplaces other than eBay and Amazon, VAT in the EU, international returns, and so on. So we've got a really broad selection of questions here, so I think that there'll really be something for everyone. Just before we get into the talk from WorldFirst, I'm going to run a poll, which is sort of fundamental question that will help us understand a bit more about the audience that we have on the webinar. Okay, if anyone else wants to vote, I'll give another 10 seconds or so. All you have to do is make sure you're on the GoToWebinar screen and choose your answer. All right, okay, I'll show you the results now. It's quite split actually. So we almost half and half. 56% say yes, they are already selling internationally, and 44% aren't yet. So I think we've got you well covered. We've got we are covering some of the basics at the start of the Q&A for those who haven't started yet, and also the slightly more advanced issues for people who are already selling internationally. So now we're going to hear from Mark Bond at WorldFirst about their services. He'll explain to you what WorldFirst are all about, what they provide. It is a very interesting service because it's relatively risk-free and very, very pertinent to people selling products internationally. So over to you, Mark.
Hello, afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Bond, and I head up the e-commerce relationship management team at WorldFirst. So this afternoon, just very clearly want to talk to you about how our services can give you a bonus over Christmas, and how we can really help to maximise the profitability of your international sales, along with growing your sales channels internationally. So in terms of what I'm going to run through this afternoon, firstly, I'm going to explain exactly who we are and how we work alongside marketplaces. I'm going to give you an idea of what's happened to sterling euro over the last year and how that may have impacted your business. I'm also going to outline how WorldFirst can exactly save you money in comparison to how you probably manage things, and how opening free bank accounts with WorldFirst works in practice. Finally, I'm going to run you through some other benefits that WorldFirst can give your business, in particular with risk management tools and actually expanding your business further. So first, a bit about WorldFirst. Well, we started just over 10 years ago in 2004, and since then we've grown very quickly to have international offices in London, Hong Kong, Sydney, Singapore, and Washington. Last year, we turned over 6.1 billion in sterling, and this year we are on track for 8.5 billion. We've been growing at a rate of around 40% year on year for the last 5 years, and this has been down to 3 core services, and namely now our e-commerce service. So the company was actually originally founded with our private desk. This was really because at the time we saw that a lot of Brits in particular were buying properties in Spain or France or Portugal, as I'm sure you probably have yourself, or you've got friends that have done so. It's obviously quite a large purchase and a big life moment. So people were finding that when they went to their banks to actually carry out the transaction, namely they weren't getting great pricing on their exchange rates, but they simply also just weren't getting the level of service that you would expect for that major event. Secondly, we have a traditional corporate service for import and export businesses, and the premise in which we add value to companies there is threefold. So again, we look to give better pricing than the banks. We also look to tailor our service levels to a level that banks will only really kind of reserve for their FTSE 250 companies. And we also tailor-make hedging strategies, which allows you to mitigate risk in currency fluctuations. Finally, the e-commerce solution, as I say, is going to be the major part of our business, and I'll give you a further outlining of this later. So, over the last 9 years, we've worked very closely with marketplaces. This relationship originated with Amazon, and that was really down to the days when Amazon weren't able to send any funds across international borders for their third-party merchants. I'm sure many of you, I think as the poll suggested, are already selling internationally, and you've probably been using Amazon's default currency converter, for example. But in terms of our relationship, 9 years ago, we started working directly with Amazon and the merchants to help them repatriate their overseas earnings. And in fact, we still do actually have some ties, in the sense that the Amazon's default currency converter is often not, it's not necessarily the most price competitive, and also there's lots of countries that they're unable to send funds to, so we're able to help merchants in those ways. We've also gone out and started to work with lots and lots of different marketplaces. 66 at the moment, but we're adding to this each month. And from that, we're able to, yes, save our clients money, but also actually play a strategic role with your business in expanding your sales channels. So in terms of what's happened with currency markets in general in the last year, and I suspect that most of you have, if you're selling internationally, it would be into the European marketplaces. So first and foremost, currency markets are actually the most volatile and largest financial markets in the world. So in terms of the rate that you get, that's actually affected by a plethora of economic, political, and societal factors. If I was going to point out one major driver for what exchange rate you'd get, then it would be economies' interest rates and the global expectations around that. Traditionally, you may see that a higher base interest rate in an economy would mean that it would have a stronger currency. For example, in the UK at the moment, we've got a base interest rate of 0.5%, and pound has obviously strengthened a lot against the euro in the last year. That has a weakened interest rate of 0.05. But one thing that I must caveat this with is that currency markets are simply too volatile, too large, and too complex to be able to put it down to something as simple as the interest rates that I've explained to you there. In all honesty, no one has a crystal ball. All we're looking to do at WorldFirst is to save you money against the exchange rates on the day, provide you with as much information as you want to be able to make an educated opinion yourself, and then from that tailor our service to how you would like to manage your funds and manage your risk effectively. So on this graph here, this is dated to the end of yesterday, you'll be able to see that we have sterling versus euro over the last year. Now, if I'm honest, a lot of our clients over the last year have been very concerned about the way that the euro has weakened against sterling. The reason being, as the euro weakens, their euro sales revenue achieve less pounds sterling when they're repatriating that profit. So in the last year, you can see that we've actually seen lows of 124.65 and highs of 144.07. What this actually accumulates to is over a 15% swing. So a lot of retailers, depending on what time of year you're trading, will have seen a difference in your profit margins of over 15%. Now, there's one thing to caveat that with as well, that you may be lucky enough to adapt your pricing somewhat to cover that change. However, the retailers I talk to would often say that that concerns them because they may become less competitive against the domestic sellers. So what I've tried to highlight here is really the workings of, over the last year, how much pound sterling you would have got for your euros. So I've used 3 key dates here in the left-hand column, and then third from left, I've used the same 20,000 euros. So starting out, if you transacted 20,000 euros of sales revenue back into sterling on the 18th of November, you can see that you would have actually got the best rate in the last year at 124.65. That obviously gives you over £16,000 worth of profit, which is far greater than what you see on the next line down. On the 17th of July 2015, you would have achieved the worst rate in the last year, which is 144.07. So for your 20,000 euros, you're actually getting over £2,162 less, which is obviously, you know, quite a drastic change in the amount of profit you're bringing back. And if you were transacting yesterday, you would have got around 140.31, accumulating to £14,000, 254. So in terms of the way that the currency markets have moved, you can see it's quite drastic in terms of hitting profit margins. So what we're trying to do is, at WorldFirst, is helping you to mitigate that risk, but also just getting better exchange rates on the day. So in terms of explaining how we can get you better exchange rates, first things first, WorldFirst, your bank, a marketplace, the post office even, when you are exchanging currency, you know, perhaps even just for holiday money, you're actually buying from somebody who is purchasing on the wholesale market. We call that the interbank market. So if you were to do a transaction with your bank, what we would typically see is that they have built in a percentage margin of perhaps 2.5% to 4%. You know, I hasten to add that these percentage margins are just the same as you buying from a wholesaler in China, for example, and then adding in your costs and ultimately profit to sell on Amazon or Cdiscount or whatever. So the banks would typically look to use a day rate. Marketplaces, however, they can charge up to 4%, and that depends on which marketplace you're looking at. But certainly, it's pretty much always over 3% that a marketplace would use, and the largest ones charge you know, up to 4%. So how we're actually going to save you money is by the fact that WorldFirst charges the lowest percentage margin. We charge 2%. So in comparison to a marketplace, we're going to be able to save you 2%, which is adding actually 2% onto your profit margins. So WorldFirst charges 2%, a marketplace would charge 4%, and banks can charge between 2.5% and 4%. In terms of how WorldFirst makes money, we're very transparent and open about that. So it's just that 2% margin. We don't charge any setup fees, maintenance fees, or even closing fees. There's not even an obligation to use the account once open. And we don't charge any individual transfer fees for amounts over 500 euros or $1,000. So what I've tried to do here is to put into practice, again, using that 20,000 euros of sales revenue, how much money you would save against using a marketplace for your repatriation. So we're working off a wholesale exchange rate margin of 139.23. You can see that the marketplace then adds in its 4% margin to give you an exchange rate of 144.80, and WorldFirst gives you a better exchange rate of 142.01. The real crux of the matter is in that bottom right-hand corner that we would give you on this transaction over £271 worth of extra profit. And just imagine, you know, if you stretch that out across the month or the year, those kind of extra profits really become quite sizable. So how does our system actually work? Well, what we look to do is we would give your business its own free segregated bank accounts in Germany, the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Poland, or Japan, wherever you're selling basically. And from that, what you would just do is plug in your WorldFirst bank account into your marketplace Seller Central or kind of Seller Hub. That means that the marketplace would then send your international sales revenue in the same currency to your WorldFirst bank account. We simply then collect the funds and send them back to you using our more advantageous exchange rates. If I'm honest, it's a pretty simple service, and we've also made the opening of the service very simple. I recently tried to open a new current account with NatWest, and I found it very, very disappointing, to be honest. So we can do it all in just 5 minutes via the hyperlink on screen. In that, we just require very simple information such as registered trading address, your passport, or proof of home address. It takes about 1 hour to process following you actually doing the 5 minutes of legwork. In that, it's just us really checking the documents. And following that, you would receive a call from your dedicated relationship manager. We've got a bit of a rule on desk that every client calling in has to be answered within 3 rings. We don't do any kind of automated systems here. We like to talk to our clients. They would give you a call and actually allocate you with your bank accounts. And from that, we'd actually walk you through on the phone, uploading the details onto your different marketplaces. We want it to be absolutely certain and clear in your minds that we go through all the processes with you to make sure that you know your funds are secure and safe and that the system set will work. So finally, the other benefits from WorldFirst, well, in comparison to a lot of marketplaces, you'd actually receive your funds a day quicker. The reason being that we're a payments company and we use faster technology and payment systems. We also give you a free online platform to manage your money, so you can log in and see your live balances, live rates, and actually click your payments yourself. We also give you risk management tools. So earlier in the presentation, I highlighted how in the last year, sterling euro has moved by over 15%. Well, what we've done for a lot of our clients in the last year is we've given them the opportunity to fix an exchange rate. Some you can basically fix for up to 3 years, although that is quite a long time. A lot of people would often fix between 3 and 12 months on perhaps a proportion of their sales revenue. And what that allows them to do is to not have to worry about currency and you know, the risks of their profit margins. It locks them in, and then they focus on what they're good at, which is, you know, selling products online. We've also really taken to actually growing our clients' businesses further. So, as already highlighted, we're working with 66 marketplaces, and ultimately what we're about there is we're trying to link your business up with any marketplace that is relevant for the product category you sell or the region you're selling in. What we want to achieve from this is very simply putting your products in front of more eyes. We've also got exclusive offers with a number of the industry leaders. So we're obviously on the webinar today with InterCultural Elements, Meridian, and Neteven. And what we've gone out and done is we're working with the best in the business to make sure that we can look after our clients and really make sure all areas of their business are covered. So if you think this sounds of interest, the next steps would be to give us a call on 020-7801-1061 or just pop us an email. If you give us a call, we'll be able to actually outline over the phone how much you could have saved in the last year and any further questions that you've got. So from here, thank you very much for listening to me today, and I'll pass it back to Andy for the rest of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really interesting presentation. We have had some questions about your service while you were talking. So I'm just going to put one of those in particular to you. I think it's well worth addressing. So although you are a UK headquartered business. You have offices around the world, and you support your clients are based all around the world. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. So we're working with over 21,000 online sellers now, and yes, we've got offices all around the world. One thing we've really pushed for in the last 18 months is to have localized support for our sellers and native speakers as well. So at the end of the day, when it's the management of your money, you want to speak to someone who you understand and is on your same time zone.
Thanks, Mark. And incidentally, I interviewed your Chief Commercial Officer, Alex Sullivan, a few weeks ago, and there's an in-depth interview with him on the Web Retailer blog. And something he told me, which I didn't realise, is that it's free to sign up, and there's no subscription fee, and it's a pretty quick process to sign up. So it's a relatively risk-free service in terms of the online seller's investment of time and money, and you're okay with people signing up because they want to have a poke around in the system and see how it works, and just then decide whether they want to actually start using it or not. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, there's no fees to sign up, no maintenance fee, no closing fee. And no obligation to use the service. Ultimately, it's a free service which allows you to get more from your own money. And as part of that, we like to think that we're very transparent about how we make money. We do that by giving you a good service. You keep exchanging with us, and then we just make that percentage margin, which is better than what you're currently doing.
Got it. Thanks a lot, Mark. We're going to head on into the Q&A now. So just before I put the first question to the panel, I'm going to run another poll. So I think it'd be interesting to see the whole international e-commerce market from the other side of the fence. So this question is just on whether the attendees on the call have themselves bought internationally. So this may be that you visited a marketplace or a retailer who's based in another country and bought direct, or maybe you've bought from a foreign retailer from a marketplace site, Amazon, eBay, that's based in your own country. We're getting some interesting results. So I'll give another 10 seconds or so in the poll. If you're not seeing the screen now, you may just need to switch over to the GoToWebinar screen, and you'll see a question there that you can answer. Okay, thank you. So I think that's really interesting that the number of people, 88%, who have bought internationally themselves, and only 12% haven't bought internationally. So I include myself as well amongst the people who've bought internationally. It's not something I do often, but I do it. And yeah, apparently most people do. I think that helps bring home the opportunity. So just taking that a little further with our first question, it would be interesting to hear the panel's thoughts on why people buy internationally, and then which countries are the biggest international buyers. So Scott, is that something you could tell us a bit more about? Why are people buying across borders?
Absolutely, Andy, and thanks for the question. It's a really pertinent question, and one that we deal with relatively often here at InterCultural Elements. People buy internationally for different reasons, but I'd probably say the top two are that either they can't find the product that they're looking for in their domestic market, or they can't find that product at the desired price in their domestic market. But I think one thing that we have to acknowledge in either one of those cases, or any other reason why they're looking abroad, is that that person generally is not doing that just for the fun of it. I mean, that poll that you just did was sort of interesting. It would be even more interesting to see exactly how many people of those people who bought internationally bought in their own language, right, from the States, from Canada, and then how many people bought from, let's say, France or Germany. because generally people don't go on to other sites with other languages just for the fun of it. They're doing it more or less out of desperation because they can't find what they wanted. And they're definitely out of their comfort zone there. So I think, you know, my answer would be for all of the sellers who are looking to potentially expand abroad is, how do I make it so that, you know, my buyers, my potential buyers, don't need to look internationally to find my products? And the key there is, if you have properly translated and localized items and you list them directly on the marketplaces in the countries that are a really good match for your product, then those buyers can buy within their comfort zone, and in the end that means more sales for you.
Thanks very much, Scott. It's a couple of things that stick out to me there as really important are one, that idea that people buy internationally because they can't find the product they're looking for locally. So it seems to me there's an opportunity there for people who sell online to seek out those markets, those countries that aren't offering your products, and you've got a good chance there to get into a market that's less competitive than your home market with the same products you already sell. So Neel from Neteven, it'd be good to hear your thoughts on which countries are the biggest drivers of cross-border trade.
Well, thanks for the question, Andy. And there's a couple of points in there. I mean, with a lot of what Scott said is you know, absolutely accurate. But one of the things that we see is, when it comes to cross-border e-commerce, I guess there's a two-step approach, and it's what eBay often call active and passive. And passive is something as simple as just shipping to the region and hoping people find you. And we see that quite a bit in I guess some of the less mature e-commerce markets. And Holland is a great example. Their native language is not English, and two of the larger e-commerce players there, Bol and Vacomp, are doing quite well, but even in just when it comes to traffic, there's still more traffic from Holland going to Amazon.com in the States. So that tells you a couple of things, and one is that there is an absolute scarcity of product. And we see a lot of that regional cross-border e-commerce in Europe. So when we're looking at Belgium and we're looking at these less developed e-commerce nations, they're buying from the next closest market. So if you're a seller outside of Europe or outside of mainland Europe, and you're looking about where I guess you'll get the most bang for your buck, and that's the question I get more often than not. Hitting the largest marketplaces in each market, as long as they're relative to the product you sell, is pretty important. When it comes to the biggest international buyers, I think we're pretty clear the direction that's going in, and that's very much in China. And I think we've all heard the quite frankly scary figures being spoken about at the moment. What with Alipay becoming, I think, almost second largest payment provider in the world after Visa now, and quite confidently stating that they believe they can get to number one, which I'm not so sure about, but that's the trend that we're seeing. And the reason we see that is because not just scarcity of products, but also authenticity. So when people are looking for brands at the right price, when it comes to these China in particular and these emerging Asian markets, they're looking for the brands they've heard of, but they can't necessarily reach when it comes to traditional commerce. And that's a lot of the flow that we're seeing, and a lot of the demand that we're seeing in our business on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thanks a lot, Neel. So as Neel picked out there, China, one of the biggest drivers at the moment, but something I often hear from people in the web retailer forum and you know, other places where I talk to sellers, is that within the English-speaking world, there's a lot of cross-border trade going on. So amongst those sellers in the US, for example, Australia, the UK, and New Zealand are also big international buyers. So moving on to the next question. So we do have a lot of people, it's around 50% on the call, who aren't selling internationally yet. So I think if you're a marketplace seller, particularly a small business, figuring out how to get started easily, quickly, without spending a lot of money and taking a lot of risks is very much on your mind. something Neil said was about active or passive selling there. So Luke from WorldFirst, what do you think about the easiest ways to get started? Is that passive approach the best way to start?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And yeah, I guess it's a really pertinent question for anyone who hasn't gone international and they're just thinking about what's the best route for me, the least risk and the least upfront cost, because we all know cash flow is very important. With regards to the passive and active selling internationally, I think passive is a really good initiative by eBay. They've done a really good job with their international shipping program, and I think that is a really nice way to just understand if people can find you, what products sell well, how's that whole process gone, and then also just capturing that data to make sure that you have it and you can understand what works when I sell internationally. That way there, you're probably limiting your risk a fair bit by doing that. I would then say looking to actively move into those markets, so onto your eBays in Germany and France is a great move. And then Amazon as well. Let's not forget how well Amazon have really done a good job of allowing sellers to just open up their networks in Europe and even in the US very quickly. You can literally, with a click of the button on your Seller Central account, you can then select for FBA and you can get your product shipped in to FBA and they do the rest for you. And there are costs applied to that, but again, that reduces the risk. And once you're at a point where you know what sells well, you can then look to reduce your costs further by maybe going merchant fulfilled and other avenues as well. I guess, as I mentioned, the data is really important. When you look at the cost of something, anything can cost anything up to a certain level when you go international. So, we're all aware that all services to go and ship internationally, to get taxed internationally, to list your products, they all come at a cost. And so really just knowing what's the right route and taking your data from your passive sales and using that and extrapolating it so you can make a good informed decision on it will help hopefully reduce the cost as well. And then I think on marketplaces, if you look to expand out a bit further on marketplaces, it's spreading portfolio. eBay and Amazon are strong here in the UK, and we tend to just think of those two as the key players. And actually, in France, there are over 40 marketplaces, and some of them are verticalized. And there are lots of marketplaces which I think you can also get onto, and they'll reduce your risk by going on more marketplaces. Again, dependent on the size of your business and your product. Sometimes it can actually increase your risk, but I think that's another thing to consider. And also, just be willing to give a period of grace, especially with some of the other more alternative marketplaces. It doesn't happen overnight, and I think that's the first thing you'll see internationally is you'll move from your domestic sales, and they won't reach the heights of what your domestic sales are. Your international sales will be slightly lower to start with, and there'll be little learning curves that you'll need to get to in order to really start motoring. And we see that a lot with clients. Once they start moving and they motor and they have everything and all the processes in place, we actually see most of their international sales sometimes considerably outsell their domestic market. So there is a huge opportunity there.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Luke. And I think it's worth, for those people who haven't already looked into this, and it may be a little bit mysterious, just to explain what we mean by passive and active in terms of selling internationally through marketplaces. So by passive, we mean that you just list on your home marketplace. So if you're in the US, you just list your products for sale on ebay.com, amazon.com. And it can often happen that people will buy from overseas because you've listed them, you've said that you'll ship overseas, or you use the eBay Global Shipping Program that's been mentioned, and that's what we mean by passive international selling. When we say active, we mean actually going out to say eBay UK, eBay Australia, and listing your items separately on that marketplace and turning off that shipping to that country on your ebay.com listings. So you're localizing your listings to that country, which means you've got specific pricing for that country, If they speak a different language, you've translated it into their language. So that's active international marketplace selling. So moving on to the next question. So this is probably the second one on the minds of those people who are getting started, and maybe some of those who are in that passive phase and are getting international sales. They start to worry about some of the things that may trip them up. So Scott, maybe you could kind of highlight what you think are some of the most common and important pitfalls.
Absolutely, Andy, and yeah, truth be told, there's a lot of them. I could probably narrow maybe the big three down into, let's say, choosing the wrong country, translation, and I'd probably say customer service. Starting off with expanding into the wrong countries. I think you have to be really strategic about which expansion markets you go into and which countries. Perhaps we should maybe even switch those around. First of all, which countries you want to go into, because each represent obviously translation costs, localization costs, and then within each country, which marketplace is going to be best suited for you. Obviously, that can be a difficult nut to crack if you're not real familiar with it. Especially in countries like France, which are extremely federated, as Luke mentioned. That is one of the reasons why it is quite recommendable to go to a service, whether it be InterCultural Elements or any other that are out there, which can give you some advice on, based on your product and your price point, exactly where your niches are. I mentioned price comparison, and that is really extremely important to factor in. You want to take a look at those marketplaces and make a bit of a comparison to what your competitors are charging there, and then add on the cost of shipping. Right? To Germany, it's probably not going to be all that much, but to Australia, you really have to factor that in if you want to make sure that you're successful there. The second one is translation, and as a native English speaker, I know that we very often have this assumption that everybody speaks English, and even though I think a lot of younger people do learn English, nowadays, and I think it's probably inaccurate to say that everybody would buy in that language. I like to use the example of my father-in-law, who's German. And even though his English is quite good, he's told me, I'll never buy anything on ebay.co.uk because I don't need to, right? I have everything here in Germany, and if I'm going to spend, 300 euro on a product, then I want to be able to see it in my language, right? So, so let's not make the assumption that English is fine. I think the second thing is, if you do choose to translate, right, when you expand, then do be careful about doing automated sort of like Google Translate tools for a number of different reasons. Number one, obviously the quality can be somewhat sketchy at times, especially if you have more specific products with a lot of with details, so technological terms and things like that. But also things like search terms, right? No tool can really introduce the correct search terms for your products. And going back to what I was saying about just leaving it in English, that's we've spoken to some sellers who just say, well, it's like I was selling actually pretty well when I was selling my item in France in English. The thing that they don't realize is that they're not getting a whole bunch of sales because the search terms in English are not the search terms that the French people are putting in. And then I think the third thing would be customer service. In short, make sure that you have quality customer service in place ahead of time, because once those questions start rolling in, then you can be setting yourself up for a fall. In the case of Amazon, you can actually get yourself suspended relatively quickly after going into a brand new expansion market if you don't have native speakers or native speaking quality answers to those questions. So those are just three that come to mind.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And those tie in, pretty well with what I hear from sellers. So I'd probably say that the top ones I hear are customer support, returns, so international returns, simply the business of shipping, international shipping, and taxes. So we'll come back to taxes in a moment. Before we get to that, I'd like to pick up on shipping a bit more, and it's a kind of fundamental question. How do I get my orders shipped overseas? It's it's a relatively simple thing, but there's lots of different ways to actually solve that problem. And as this question points out, or suggests, that international shipping can be very expensive. But there are lots of different ways to address that expense and make your products more competitive overseas by being able to offer cheaper shipping. So I'm going to break down what some of those ways are for the audience. Now, they're not particularly US specific. A lot of the different options apply globally, but I'll try and point out if I mention a service provider, for example, if they're in the US or the UK or elsewhere. Just before getting into it, I'm going to run a quick poll. So for those of you who are shipping internationally, there's a poll on screen now, just asking how do you do it? Some of you may use a variety of methods, so choose other if you use several methods in combination. I'll just give it a few more seconds. So if you're on a different application, just go over to the GoToWebinar application and you'll see a poll on there that you can answer. Okay. So here's the results. So this to me is very interesting because 42% are using their national postal service to ship internationally. So the USPS, US Postal Service in the US, Royal Mail in the UK, and so on. Now, that can be a good option for shipping internationally, but it isn't necessarily the cheapest. It's probably the most convenient, particularly for sellers who are using their national service to ship domestically as well. So I'm going to run through some of the options that you have other than your national carrier. So some of these will sound really obvious, but I think they're worth pointing out at first. So one is the size of your boxes that you're using to ship orders. We've probably all received a package from Amazon that's a huge box with lots of packaging and a small product somewhere in the middle. So when you're shipping domestically, that can be an issue, but maybe not a huge issue. When you're shipping internationally and things are being sent by cargo planes, the volume of your packages becomes much more important. So don't use more packaging than you need to, and don't use a bigger box than you need to. Second, maybe obvious point here is that there are different carriers for plenty of different carriers for international parcels, and you may have discounted other carriers when you're only shipping domestically, just stuck with your national postal service. When it comes to international, it's well worth comparing them again, and you can push your shipping provider for discounts. They'll give discounts anyway at certain volume levels, but you can ask as well. And if you haven't started shipping internationally, you can think about saying what you expect your volume to be and trying to get a discount based on that. So moving on quickly to some of the other ideas that you could look into for getting cheaper international shipping. So there are services out there, often software providers who provide shipping software. So ShipStation is the best known in the US. Parcel Hub is one in the UK. So what these providers offer are pooled discounts. So you can take advantage of lower shipping rates because the overall volume of packages going through that service qualifies for a high discount, higher than you'd be able to get on your own. Another option for international shipping, which is kind of a way around it, is by using a fulfillment provider in the local country. So let's say you're in the US and you're shipping to the UK. if you're doing that in a high enough volume, and it doesn't have to be a huge volume, but relatively high, not just 1 or 2 parcels a day or a week, you could look into a company who will warehouse your products in that country, so in the UK in that example, and when an order comes in, they'll ship them out from their warehouse in the UK. So you'll be paying relatively cheap per product freight shipping to get your products over to the country, and then it will be the local postage rates plus the fulfillment providers' fees to ship from their warehouse. So the best known ones here are Amazon with their FBA service and Shipwire, but there are many local providers. So just to quickly bring up a couple more options. So one is mail consolidators. This is a particularly sort of strong industry in the US. So companies like Globe-Gistics and Ascendia, what they do is they collect your parcels from your place of business or from home if you're running a business from home, consolidate them with the parcels from many other businesses, and then ship them in bulk over to the country that they're going to. And because they do that, they can offer much lower rates. And a final one is to look into different shipping insurance options. So you don't have to insure your parcels with the carrier that you're using. You can actually use a separate company or even self-insure, so take the risk on yourself. So those are some of the possibilities for saving on shipping. Next question, we're actually going to go ahead a little to taxes. So this is a big one that I see sellers raise. How to handle VAT in the EU, and are there any tools that can make it easy? And I think it's also worth kind of making a mention in here of US sales tax as well. So for those people who are outside of the US shipping in. So Chris from Meridian, is this something you can talk us through?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Andy. Yes, you're absolutely right. VAT and sales tax can often be a barrier to companies as they think about expanding internationally. In fact, Amazon have told us that it's actually, from their perspective, the #1 issue for them when they're trying to encourage Amazon sellers to sell beyond their own domestic market. As the audience is pretty much split 50-50, whereby you have half of your audience who are completely new or looking at international selling for the first time, I would advise them that to definitely look at VAT as something from the get-go. In our experience, we've had many sellers who've seen that there is an opportunity in another market, and they've rushed to exploit that opportunity, only to find out later on that they never registered for VAT in the relevant country, that they never collected the correct amount of VAT, and now they find themselves in a situation whereby they have to pay that money back to the tax authorities in the relevant country. So unfortunately, at Meridian, we do see this often, and it can be a bit of a mess, naturally enough. So my first point of advice for first-time sellers is to really take some advice about your VAT issues when you are deciding to sell internationally. There are these things called thresholds, whereby you can sell into another EU country up to roughly about €35,000 in 1 year without having to worry about registering for tax in another country. But if you are very much focused on selling quite a lot into another country, and you're taking a more active and proactive sales approach, then you definitely need to look at the potential of getting a VAT registration in another country. So for the other half of the audience who are already selling internationally, it would be a good idea to make sure and go back and reflect back that you're charging the correct VAT rate, and that you are and that if you need to, that you're not paying that money over to HMRC, and that you're actually collecting it and giving it to the relevant tax authority. So that's you're saving yourself a lot of hassle in the long run. I suppose as well, just another point of advice when it comes to VAT. Many of you will have heard of the Fulfillment by Amazon program, which is an excellent program and we highly recommend it. And we do encourage our own clients to use that particular program, whereby Amazon have a network of fulfillment centers all across Europe and North America and China as well now. But if you are putting products into the FBA warehouses in another country, there may be tax implications because of that. So just be aware of that when you start thinking about using fulfillment centers, Amazon fulfillment centers overseas. You mentioned, Andy, US sales tax. Yes, this is something that does come up. There's a little bit of confusion about it because, well, a lot of confusion. There are over 11,000 taxing jurisdictions in the US. So even in one small city, there could be 5 or 6 different taxing or tax rates applicable. So it can cause an awful lot of confusion. And there are definitely automated tools that help a seller calculate the exact tax rate for a particular region within the US. But that's only half of the story. That's only half of the picture. What a seller then needs to do after they've calculated the right tax rate, either themselves or with the help of automation, they need to actually file tax returns. They need to register for US sales tax, and they have to do all the compliance side of things as well. And that can be tricky, especially for non-US sellers. We at Meridian, we do offer a compliance service around US sales tax, but I suppose just final word of advice on sales tax is that if you are taking products and putting them into a warehouse in the United States so that your products are closer to customers, there is a high probability that you might have to register for sales tax in the US. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Thanks very much, Chris. And we're already out of time, I'm afraid. We've already used up our hour. So I'm sorry that we didn't get to everybody's questions. We've covered as many as we can. If you had a question that was for a specific panelist, whether you put it in when you registered for the webinar, or if you've put it in the chat box during the webinar, if we can see that it was for a specific panelist, we will forward that on and try and get an answer for you. Another option for those of you who didn't get your question answered is the Web Retailer Forum. So if you're not already registered at Web Retailer, it's free to join, and there's a forum in there that is for online sellers selling anywhere in the world, but we do have a particular international focus there, so it's a good place to ask your questions. I'll come along there and look out for anyone who attended the webinar posting questions, and do my best to either answer myself or try and find somebody else who can give you a really good answer. The recording will be sent both to people who attended the webinar and to those who couldn't make it today. That'll come by email within the next day or two. For future webinars and generally to keep up to date on the world of selling through online marketplaces, again, you can register on Web Retailer, and there is an exit survey after the webinar. So after you leave, you'll see a survey which is really useful for us. If you can let us know how you found it, if there's anything you didn't like, and if there's anything you think we can do better, we'd love to know so we can make these webinars better for you. The link to the survey will also be in the follow-up email. So finally, the last thing to say is a huge thank you to everyone involved. WorldFirst sponsored the webinar, so without their involvement, this wouldn't be happening. So huge thank you to them. They do offer a very useful service for people selling internationally. Big thank you to the panelists. They've given up their time to answer your questions, and they're experts in their field. So I really do appreciate it. And most importantly, to all of you who've attended the webinar today, thank you very much for taking the time to register and to submit your questions. We hope we'll see you again. Thanks very much, and we'll be closing the webinar in around 1 minute.